Well, he's been the subject of almost 50 Hollywood movies, but had he not been gunslinging and taking his vitamins instead, chances are he would have lived beyond his 21 years. And on the line to discuss the man we speak of, the legend, the myth that is one Billy the Kid, I'm very delighted to welcome an award-winning historian and author. His name is Mark Lee Gardner. He's appeared on the History Channel, PBS, American Experience, ABC World News, National Geo History. He wrote a great book, which I've just bought during the week on Amazon. It's called To Hell on a Fast Horse, the untold story of Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, and he joins us on the line now. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Very good. How are you all doing?
Yeah, great. So Billy the Kid, like Ollie said, a very short life, dead at 21, but he had a bit of a perilous existence, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. It was mostly due to the place that he ended up living in, New Mexico Territory, which in the 1870s and early 80s was not a very peaceful, place to live.
He had a tough start to begin with, like he was an orphan at 14, Mark.
In fact, it even started before that. His family lost their father when he was very young, and we don't know if he died in the Civil War or some other cause. But even while he was a very small boy, he had a single parent, his mother, Catherine McCarty. And then, he lost her when he was still a teenager in Silver City, New Mexico, and he had a stepfather that didn't care very much about him or his brother. So he was kind of left to his own devices to some extent.
Well, now, with a name like Henry McCarthy, there must have been Irish blood there somewhere.
Yes, we know from the U.S. Census records that his mother had been born in Ireland. When she immigrated to the U.S., we don't know if it was as a child or as a bride. Catherine McCarty was a native of Ireland.
What do you think it was about Billy the Kid that captured the imagination so much? I mean, like Ollie said, there's been countless movies made about him, and people have always been fascinated by him. You know, a guy who had such a short life and lived a very long time ago.
Well, I think there are several factors. There's a bit of the Robin Hood element. He became a folk hero in the southwestern United States, mostly because he was so well liked. I mean, we're talking about someone who did kill people, but he had friends, and there were legends that grew up about his relationships with local women. He danced the ballets or fandangos, became a bit of a romantic character, but also I think a lot of it has to do with his name. I mean, Billy the Kid. There's just something that's fascinating, Billy the Kid, the way it rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
And then there's also this whole thing about the way he was killed. He was shot in the dark by Sheriff Pat Garrett. He had been promised a pardon by Governor Lew Wallace earlier. So there's a sense of injustice. Just the way he came to his end feels like it was wrong in some way, and that Billy should have been given that pardon and given a chance to live his life. So there are just several things that come together. And then the fact he was so young. He was only 21. So there's a bit of romanticism. A large factor that led to his popularity was a best-selling book that appeared in 1926 called The Saga of Billy the Kid, and it really steamrolled from that book to the present day.
Was that just a newspaper get-together, Mark, or was it an author who took that on? Or
it was an author, actually Walter Noble Burns. He began his career as a journalist, but he was looking for his next book, got interested in this story of this very young outlaw who died at the age of 21, who supposedly killed one man for each year of his life, which is not correct. Still very readable today. This Saga, Billy the Kid, it was one of the first Book of the Month Club selections and became a huge bestseller. And as I said, that really started. Before that book, Billy the Kid was not a well-known outlaw or American figure. But after that book, many people knew about Billy the Kid, and then they had movies. There was a movie made off of that book in 1930, a very early film.
Wow.
So it's just continued. The legend has continued to grow in the present day.
How many notches would he have had on his gun? Re-killings that are attributed to him?
Yeah, that's a very good question. He single-handedly probably killed, we know he killed 4 men, but he was involved in the deaths of as many as 8 men during what we call the Lincoln County War, when he was part of a vigilante group that was fighting for his employers. So he did not kill 21 men, but as I tell people, 4 is plenty. That's
Absolutely.
A lot to me.
They were very gruesome times in general, weren't they? I mean, I think sometimes, like you mentioned, things being romanticised. I think often movies and that can romanticise that time in America when actually it was probably quite bleak and bloody and brutal a lot of the time.
It was. And some historians would point out, I would be one of them, that it was very violent, and especially these killings that Billy the Kid was personally responsible for. Some would say that some sense justified. I mean, one of the killings, he was struggling with a bully and was trying to fend him off, and the gun went off, and the bully was mortally wounded. Another individual was actually out to get the kid and killed him in self-defense. Two of the deaths were actually deputy sheriffs who were his guards. And at that time, Billy was sentenced to hang, and this was an escape. And he felt that to preserve his life, and he wanted to avoid the scaffold, and it was either him or them. And so he killed his two guards. It's the most famous jailbreak in American history, actually.
Do you know, when you look at that...
Oh, yes.
tin plate picture of him, Mark, taken in 1879. It's the only apparently proven 100% accurate picture that is actually him. There are other pictures which exist, but that's the one that they say is actually him. Sold in 2011 for $2.3 million, the most expensive photograph ever purchased at auction, which is incredible in itself. But when you look at that picture, you know, you're talking about him being a charismatic individual. He might have been just having a bad hair day or whatever else, but he looks very, very ordinary in it.
He really does, and he doesn't look that attractive. But you're absolutely correct when you say bad hair day. It would be like, you know, if the only picture that was preserved of you or I turned out to be one we hated. Like, gee, you know, of all that. And in fact, his sweetheart at Fort Sumner, she hated that photo. She said that it didn't look anything like him. So it's interesting that the photos that have been put forward as possibly Billy the Kid, they're all basing it on this tintype. And if that really didn't capture the kid's essence, and you're matching it with that, well, you're probably not really matching it to what Billy looked like. So you're matching it to the abnormality as opposed to a photo that really, you know, did look like this individual. But you're absolutely right. That's the only authentic photograph we have of Henry McCarty, William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid.
$2.3 million. That's a lot of money.
Yes, you're also correct. It remains the highest price paid for a 19th century photograph. And I think it tells us a lot about the legend and how big that has become in American history and folklore. There is only one other outlaw that has the status of Billy the Kid. That would be Jesse James of Missouri. But Billy the Kid is an international icon, and because there's only one, then that brought the highest dollar.
I think as well it goes back to the point you made as well about him being a little immortalised, because I think in any situation when somebody dies young like that, they do become immortalised, and maybe they become a legend a little bit more than if they had lived a long life.
That's absolutely right, yes. I often have said that had Billy lived and had he actually gone to the scaffold, I don't think we'd be talking about him today. There's a certain romance, intrigue, especially about the way he died. It's still controversial to this day. It was in a darkened room. Some people question the account about how he was killed, how Pat Garrett killed him that night at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And, you know, he had a lover at Fort Sumner. That's the other romantic thing about it, is that Billy the Kid could have easily crossed the border into Mexico and left New Mexico behind and lived to, you know, a few more years at least. But he chose to go back to Fort Sumner, where he knew that he was going to be hunted. He went back there because that's where his sweetheart, Paulita Maxwell, lived. And that's where he felt at home, where he had family. The Hispanic population liked Billy, and he had friends. So he made that decision, which, you know, was fateful. It led to his death. You know, he did not leave behind his sweetheart and the people he had grown to feel comfortable around.
Lastly, Mark, looking through the spectacles of 2019, do you see him as someone who has written this book about him and has studied him up close and personal? Do you see him as criminal? Do you see him as folk hero? Do you see him as a little of the two, or a man more sinned against than sinned? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I'm sympathetic towards Henry McCarty or Billy the Kid. I do think that he deserved that pardon that was promised by the governor, but I also know that had he gotten the pardon, I don't know that his life would have changed that much. You know, people say, you know, well, what do you think would have happened? I just, you know, I don't think he would have grown up and become a member of the school board. It's just kind of the life that he led. And he had an opportunity to leave that behind and, you know, stop the cattle rustling, but he didn't. I am sympathetic sympathetic, but I just don't see Billy changing his ways. I think he had gotten to this pattern of survival and taking what he wanted. And I think that would have continued, pardon or not.
Well, he would have been 160 years old this month. His legend continues, and it lives on, and it looks like it's going to do for a long, long time to come. Mark, Lee Gardner, thank you very much for taking the call this morning and sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks a million, Mark.
I love to talk about the Billy the Kid. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.